So it's good to have Pat Herak here with us for these summertime edition of the podcast. Pat is a good friend and fellow board member for NABBA, and has an interesting brass band past. In addition to being the as far as I'm concerned, the most connected person in North American brass banding across not only North America but also in England as well. I don't think there's a single person in the brass band world that Pat doesn't know.
I don't know. I still think I have competition within my own family for that one between Diana and Paul. I think.
Well, maybe they helped you out a little to know all these people. But I think the coolest thing about why we wanted to talk to you is why I wanted to have some conversation with you is because there's a plethora of events that you have had a big hand in starting, which will, obviously have been going on for many years and will continue to go on for many years. And, it's a unique thing to have somebody who is motivated and organized and talented enough to take something that doesn't exist and make it exist, and for it to keep going in perpetuity. So what are some of the things that you've had a hand in getting started and up and running from nothing?
Well, with the Central Ohio Brass Band, we started the Ohio Brass Arts Festival back around, 2006 or 7. I think this was the 15th year of that. We started the Ohio Brass Band in 2008, which has now become the Dublin Silver Band. And as part of the Dublin Community Bands organization, we started the Dublin Youth Brass Band in 2014. The Dublin Festival of Brass in, I think, 2018, and the Dublin Metro Brass in 2019. So 2 festivals and a few different groups to add to where we are in town here. And I think, we're fortunate because of the Ohio State Marching Bands. Every year there's 60 to 80 people that graduate that play brass instruments from the university that go on elsewhere. And I think that was part of what helped Paul start the Brass Band of Columbus back in 1982 or 3. I know you already met with him last autumn, but there's just a lot of players out there, and I think trying to reach more people and bring them in and help them feel welcome and find a place after school, because music is lifelong, right? We want that message for everybody.
Yeah. So you didn't have any part of forming the Central Ohio Brass Band, but you did have a part in forming the Ohio Brass Arts Festival.
Yes. It was called the Ohio Collegiate Brass when it first started. And I think maybe 1988. Shoot, I didn't even play an instrument then. I didn't start an instrument until 10th grade, believe it or not. And it was because I was going to a football game, high school football game, and my friend in the band said, if you come with the band and carry coach, you can get into the game for free. And when I was at the game, the band director said, "Hey, our trumpet player is moving away. Do you want to join the band and take his spot in the show?" And I said, "I don't play an instrument yet." And so he said, "Oh, we'll worry about that later." So they taught me how to play. I pretty much carried a baritone the rest of the marching band season. And then I learned how to play baritone, and over the summer learned trombone so I could play in jazz band. And, so I didn't start an instrument until like 89, I think. 90.
That's how I dealt with a lot of drum corps I taught. Oh, you don't play here. It's fill this hole.
Yeah. So anyways, in college, and you might find this a little bit funny, I met Diana and we started dating, and she was in this Ohio Collegiate Brass Band. I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. And so they had auditions in the autumn for the next year. And they said, I'm still kind of new to an instrument. Didn't read treble clef yet, so I had to learn treble clef. You have to play a slow melody and a technical piece for your tryout. So I played Carmen, Ohio, the Ohio State alma mater, for my lyrical, and the Michigan State fight song for my technical.
Oh, man.
And I didn't make the band.
No.
But I took some lessons and made it the next year. And that was the Ohio Collegiate Brass. And in 1995, they changed it to Central Ohio Brass Band because there's so many graduates and it wasn't really a collegiate group anymore. And I played with them for about another 5 years. And when it came time to maybe try to get all these bands that are in the Columbus area together for an event, Central Ohio Brass Band seemed to have a little bit more active board, and I was on their board of directors. And so we got that going. And it was originally kind of a pre-contest concert. And so you'd have all the bands that would go to NABBA every year, BBC, Western Reserve, as well as some of the other local bands, the BITL Alumni Band, Scioto Valley Brass and Percussion. And we all got together. And I think after I stopped running the event, there was a big snow out in March. And I think that's when they moved it to the summertime so they wouldn't have to deal with any weather issues. But you still get the rain sometimes, which we dodged, I think, the past 2 years, right, Amy?
Yeah, we didn't dodge the heat last year, though.
That's true. Yeah, this year was perfect, wasn't it?
It was wonderful.
What snow?
Yeah, there's always weather, one way or the other. if you're in the winter, you get snow. I've always thought it was a curious thing. We did a concert here in the Triangle many years ago with we had Steve Sykes over from England, the tuba player and conductor. And it just so happened that the week he was here, we had like a crazy ice storm that literally shut the town down for 3 days. And for years after, he was like, well, I don't know if we should schedule a concert that first week in February. We could get an ice storm. I'm like, it happened once, Yeah, you could get an ice storm anytime in the winter, but this is North Carolina. The odds of it happening are on the lower side, but it's like every year it's a conversation about, well, there could be a weather event. It's like, yeah, there could. Yeah.
I don't think there's any time that's protected from weather, whether it's the heat or the rain or the snow. Now, Amy, a question for you that I'm curious about is, were you in Atlantic when the Mid-Atlantic Brass Band Festival started?
Yeah, I was on the board then.
What kind of got that going? I'm kind of curious.
That was Margie Craver. It started out, we had been for years, we had been getting together with like the New Jersey, Maryland, sometimes Virginia, sometimes New York kind of collective of brass bands to do a pre-NABBA show. And it was kind of like, it was similar to the Dublin Festival Brass, but it was never a competition. And the money was pooled together. Eventually the money was pooled together to bring in a clinician. So then if we pooled together it as multiple bands, then it really wasn't that expensive to bring in some big name to work with all the brass bands. We'd share the time between all of us and get some feedback before NABBA. And then once we had a clinician or two there, then it was like, well, they're here, they might as well do a masterclass too. And once we had a masterclass and we had the sessions with the bands, then it was like, well, everyone's here, we might as well give people an opportunity to compete with their pieces if they're going to be entering the solo competition at NABBA. So that's when we formed the competition. And it just kind of expanded from there. And at a certain point, Margie Craver started kind of leading it. It became kind of her project. And we were all working on it, but she kind of oversaw the whole thing. And then we started, it became really pretty successful. We had the university resources for free as long as we had it over the weekend. And eventually we pretty much filled up the local hotel and people were staying for a whole weekend. And then the culmination, the biggest thing was we started having money left over, after the festival. So Margie had the big idea. And she decided that she would bring Corey over. And we were like, you have to be kidding me. But Margie can, you know, she thinks of these things. So we committed to bringing Corey over, and so for the next several months, we're all contacting everyone. I'm sure you guys were probably contacted. We contacted everyone to basically arrange a tour with Corey so that we could get them over here. And it's at some point, I remember us sitting there and we were like, we are on the hook for like $100,000 right now. We're figuring out how many locations we'd have to schedule them for to like bring it down to like a normal amount, and we did it. Margie did a huge portion of that Corey tour. So we had them for the festival, and that was kind of like, look at where we've come, you know, from this little gathering of a few bands playing for friends and family in the hall so that we can get a little bit of experience before NABBA, all the way through to master classes with the section leaders from Corey. So
it's funny how, you know, how things connect, because that Corey band tour, one of the places that Margie got in contact with was here in the Triangle. And we, you know, I had to really convince our board to jump on board and take on the risk of bringing them in here. And it ended up being one of the greatest concerts we've ever done here in the Triangle. We filled an 1,800 seat hall with the Corey band. And because of that one concert, we had so many kids audition for our youth program the next year. We started a third band. So the academy band that we have here is literally a direct descendant of that idea, you know. So it's funny how all those things got connected.
Yeah, all it takes really is a spark sometimes. And I think, you know, I don't know what the critical mass is, you know, whether it's 4 or 5 bands to first come together and have some sort of event like that. Didn't you have a one-day thing in the Triangle area with all brass in the past couple of years?
Yeah, we started the North Carolina Brass Band Festival the summer before June, in June of 2019, and we had 8 brass bands at it. You know, the 4 bands from our organization, another local brass band, Smoky Mountain Brass Band from Asheville, Queen City Brass Band from Charlotte, and we had a youth band from the divisional South Carolina, North Carolina Salvation Army. And that went really well. And it was really easy to pull that one off. And then the coronavirus hit and we were on pause for 2 years. And this June, earlier in June, we had the second annual, you know, over 4 years, the second annual Brass Band Festival. We had 6 groups this year. It wasn't all brass bands. We had a couple of brass ensembles, but we kept the event going, and all you have to do is have a venue to do it at and a little bit of organization and get the performance off the ground. And, you know, we're hoping that next year we'll have some more brass bands participating. There's not as many brass bands around here. You know, we could probably throw together a really spectacular festival if we had 8 brass bands in one town. But we only have 5 in our town. So,
well, some of it too is just your organization has 4 brass bands by itself, right? Yeah, so that's always a good start.
It's a good starting point, yeah, for sure.
When I lived in the UK from 2004 to 2005, I remember there was one stretch where Diana and I must have gone 10, 12 weekends in a row going to brass band events because there's so much stuff going on over there. It started with the areas and then went into like, you know, the spring festival and the masters and things like that, and smaller contests like Buxton. And so part of, you know, what I was trying to do is get an idea of what are the different formats that there can be. And even coming back to the States, I went out to Seattle one year in January because they've had the Brass Band Northwest Festival out there just to see what they were doing, what that's like. I went up to Toronto for the Hannaford Festival of Brass. So just to see, you know, there's so many different ways things can be done that I think, you know, once again, you just need that group of 4 or 5 bands and decide and agree upon how you want to do things. And you mentioned, Amy, that there is a contesting aspect to Mid-Atlantic Brass Band Festival now.
It's only a solo, excuse me, a solo competition. And so I think it started with, we started a youth brass band. I'm sorry, a youth, well, we did start a youth brass band, but we started a youth brass competition first, I believe, because we wanted to encourage some more area students to compete. And then what we did was the Mid-Atlantic Brass Band Festival was usually in like late February. So what I would do is I would go to NJMEA in January and go through all of the booths and just say, I am doing a youth competition and I'm looking for swag for prizes. So, I would just collect, like the music publishers would donate a solo or two. Military bands, I mean, they would just like dump bagfuls of stuff on me. Area colleges, music stores, I'd get lots of stuff. And then we would then on top of that, we paid the judges a small amount, and then the rest of the money was divvied up for the prize winners. And then usually Dylan's Music would donate a gift certificate and stuff. So they got a good amount of stuff, and it wasn't an expensive competition to run. And usually if the prize money wasn't a substantial enough amount, we would take some of the money from the overall budget from the festival so that they could at least win. It was frequently like the winner would get something like, we had like high brass and low brass. Winner would get like 150, second would get like 100, and third would get like 50, which to a kid can be pretty nice. And then they get several gift cards and all that swag and some solos. Euphonium.com, Adam Frey's website, was incredibly generous. They gave a ton of music, and Pat Stuckmeyer would always give lots of stuff as well from Just for Brass. So we got a good amount of swag that we could give to the kids. And then I don't know when it was, but then we added adult, and then I think that was the NABBA categories. We had high brass, low melody, high brass technical, low brass, low melody, low brass technical. I don't know when that was added in, but it brought in, especially the youth one, brought in some more people, brought in some more kids to the festival. And you could see like they're in there with the master classes and stuff. So even if they weren't in a brass band, you'd see them coming in for that competition.
Well, and it can also probably be used as a recruiting tool for the youth band, right?
Yep, because while they're there, hey, check out the show tonight. This is a brass band. You want to be in a brass band. This is the information.
Now, Aaron, where are things in Tampa? Like you've got Sunshine, Tampa Youth Band coming up now. In Orlando, you've got Celebration, in Central Florida. Is there enough of a critical mass down there to get something going?
Yeah, it's actually funny that you brought up Marjorie, because she and I were in conversations about doing a Florida event right before pandemic hit, and I'm sure we're going to open that door here, because all of us we're all kind of in the same boat of we're in our first real season back, pretty much. But there's also Orchid City is down there and like the Palm Beach area, and then there's another one in Jacksonville that the name is escaping me, and then UF just started their brass band as well. So there is a handful here in the state, and which is weird that there's actually not more going on right now, just because there's so many good institutions and so many things. I just don't think the bug has made its way all the way down yet. But we eventually do want to do a Florida event very similar to what the ones that you guys are talking about now, and getting that whole thing started. I mean, Central Florida's got a youth group as well. I think they got 2 now, actually. So it's there. I mean, the roots and the foundations are there, and I think the people to make what I'm just listening to all of y'all's stories about this, what it really is like, yes, you have the groups and everything, like the institutions are there, but it's really just like a handful of people who really want to make things happen, making things happen. And That's really what it is. And I think here we just recently started to get those people, and then got hit with a bug that made everything a little bit harder too. So stay tuned. We're working on it.
Well, we want the brass band bug, not the COVID bug, right?
Well,
Yes.
Margie's down there now, so
Yep.
it's only a matter of time then.
I mentioned it at a pub with Gavin, and she happened to be sitting beside me, and then I got an email. I don't even know how she got my email, but I got an email from her. Hey, let's make this happen. Like literally the next day. And I don't know how she got my email. I was a sub in the group at the time. And she messaged me. She was like, you seem enthusiastic and we could get this done. Let's make it happen. And so I think we'll open the door to that conversation again.
That is Margie. Who knows how she got your email, but she's on it.
And that's one of the things I like, I'd like to see more from NABBA in the future. And I know we've started that the past few years is, people pay their NABBA memberships, and, it has always been focused on the contest, I think, since 1983, and not so much supporting the regional festivals. I think there was a Silver Bells campaign for some time, but the money ran out. But to see an effort to really help get some of these things jump started, so that, more people can see more bands. I mean, when you have a festival, you've got a built-in audience already too, which helps a little bit with the other band members. And it's always fun to hear other bands play. I don't know how many bands you got to hear, Amy, at OBAF, because I know you had something going on earlier in the day, but I think I was there from 11 a.m. until the very end watching every group. It was a lot of fun.
How many groups were at OBAF this year?
Let's see. I think there were nacho bands. There was 2 ensembles, and then 4 more brass bands, maybe. It was a little lighter year, I think, because of COVID, but, still coming back from COVID, but still a good day out.
Does it get better better attendance from bands and better participation from bands by being in the summer versus being in March?
I think it's tough to tell the attendance for OBAF because so many people, there's a Mexican restaurant where people tend to sit in and have some beers while they're watching other bands or margaritas or whatnot.
Well, I'm not talking about the audience. Audiences are a crapshoot for brass bands anyways, but what about the participating bands? Because some bands don't play in the summer. Some bands don't like working things up in the summer. Some bands are on vacation all summer long, like mine, for the most part. So is it better for the participation of bands to be during the regular part of the season or in the summer?
I think it really depends on each band's kind of concert season. Like DSB typically goes through the first week of August and takes a break because they play at the Dublin Irish Festival. BBC and Cobb and Metro Brass usually end around the end of June or July, the week of July 4th, and play some gigs around then. So something in early June, I think, makes a lot of sense for a lot of those groups. The Dublin Youth Brass Band had been built around that festival and just getting ready to perform at that festival because it was only like a week-long or 2-week-long summer course. Although with Amy in charge now, we're looking forward to making that go a little bit more year-round and hopefully getting them to play both DFOB and OBAF next year, which would be great.
And NABBA.
Eventually, yeah.
That's still a ways. So I think it kind of depends, for DFOB right now, this was the first year that BBC and Cobb actually played at it. So there were more local bands, but it's that time of year where bands from Cincinnati and up from Detroit are happy to come down because it's only a 2 to 3.5 hour drive to get a good run through before NABBA and have a chance to potentially win some prizes as well. So I think it just depends what's the focus of the different bands and what do they want to do and when are their times off, like you said. I know May is a tough time to do things because of graduations, though.
May is a rough month. It's really a rough month.
School teachers have concerts. I don't know how many music teachers you have in your groups.
A lot.
Yeah, like band directors. Yeah, so that can be quite a challenge sometimes.
Yeah, the AP testing, with youth bands, the AP testing in the first 2 weeks of May is a real trouble area. School band concerts, we don't do anything in May except just rehearse. We don't do any performances in May with the Triangle Brass Band just because it's it's right after NABBA, so you're not really ready to do anything. Our big push was to get ready for our brass band festival the first weekend in June after NABBA. And
That's fall's tough too because you're fighting the King marching band.
Yeah, that's a problem the UK doesn't really have, do they? You know, so you'll have national finals and British Open and local regional contests in October over there. But, you know, that's if you tried to have a festival in October, that'd be a challenge.
No, that's the biggest problem with getting anything in the fall is that the brass bands are so closely tied in with the music educators, and they're all busy doing marching band in September and October.
I think though one of the things to kind of keep in mind too, though, is I think sometimes when you first start a brass band, you just go for the low hanging fruit. You know, people that are already playing instruments, and I think if you can reach out to people that might be interested, but just haven't had the opportunity. Of course, you have to have the instruments to do that. You have to have the people to help them. I think, you know, there's a way to potentially make brass banding a little more inclusive than just stealing people from wind bands. You know, although that's obviously, like I said, low hanging fruit, an easy place to start.
That's kind of what the youth bands do, though, and we're talking about like a 20 to 30 year perspective of sorts, you know, of just like that's our thought process with establishing this Tampa group is now, and we also have the university group up the road now, is like we have a place for them to start as opposed to jumping into the, you know, the Tampa band and learning what brass band is right off the rip like that. Now you kind of have this like, oh, I kind of know what this thing is that you can grow and nurture through. And we want to eventually, like a lot of the UK bands, have like that C or D band way down there where it's like you pick up your instrument. You don't have to be in a high school or middle school band program to be going through music education. You could be going through our program eventually, which I know is a big thing for a lot of other programs. And you know, not a lot of the bands here in the States have that yet. So we have to poach from wind band and orchestra people, and Orlando commercial players as well.
And I think, you know, most school bands here, at least in Ohio, I think start students in 5th or 6th grade typically. And from what I remember in the UK, some of the brass bands and Salvation Army groups, they would start kids, you know, even younger than that sometimes because they had the instruments. And the school brand programs weren't necessarily that strong. The school I taught at over there, I think they might have only had band meet once or twice a week because they had kind of, you know, that it wasn't the same schedule every day sort of thing. Amy, did you work much with beginners or school kids when you were over there?
I worked with school kids, but I worked with the Coralton High School kids, but that was teaching music composition, because one of my minors was music education in the community. And so it was specifically like not as a school like employee music education, like how do you find grants, how do you fund workshops, how do you set those things up outside of the school like network. So we did some work in the school setting, but most of that was teaching composition. And then outside of school, you know, we set up clinics and workshops and stuff to practice how do you advertise, how do you gather people together and set something like that up. And then I subbed in the Northamptonshire, which my husband calls Northamptonshirevilleburg. Like how many, you know, Ville, but orchestral winds, because that was a music service. And they won some competition, and the prize was playing in Carnegie Hall. So, I got an email and they're like, we need these instruments to join our community ensemble, our community wind ensemble to play in Carnegie Hall. I was like, oh, free trip to New York, you know, sign me up. So I get to see what like a music service was and how it ran as well. So that's something that we don't really have much of we don't really have like any of in the United States, a music service.
What age were those students in the music service?
That was a community funded music service. So that was anyone in the area could participate. So there were high school students through community members doing that.
Would a music service over there be closely related to what we would consider to be a nonprofit youth organization over here?
I think it would be more closely linked to what Dublin is doing because they would get taxpayer money to run the music service. So it was publicly funded. So I wouldn't call it a nonprofit.
But they're independent arts organizations. Like they're not attached to a school, it is its own business, essentially.
I don't know how much I can say about the organization when you dig deeper into specifically what it's considered and stuff. I think we'd have to ask somebody who spent more time, like Helen Harrelson could probably be a good person to dig deeper into specifically how it's organized, because I wasn't in like the leadership of that to see where specifically all the funds are gathered from and how it's used and what it's legally, set up as. But it was at least mostly publicly funded thing.
Well, I'm not really talking about, like how is it specifically funded, but like what is the music service? Is it a program that runs a concert band, a brass band, a choir, an orchestra? Like our youth, like we have if you have a youth orchestra, there's two ways you can have one. One is you can have one that's attached to a local orchestra, like the Greenville Symphony Youth Orchestra, or you could just have an association like the Greenville Youth Symphony Association, which is independently run as a charity, but it's the organization exists to provide an ensemble experience for local kids, whether they're in a school program or not.
I think this is kind of like the local municipality, it runs it.
Did that also include private lessons along with the ensembles?
I'm not sure.
Because I think some of the stuff over there, you might have some private lessons associated with it, or at least maybe your first four as you're getting started on an instrument for the first time, just to get going.
And they have.
I was going to say Diana did some peripatetic teaching over there as well, where she taught like group lessons to low brass kids for, I don't know, about 12 weeks or something, and then if they wanted to continue on, they do private lessons, but it was just to help get them started.
And they had like different, depending on what level you were, based on the ABRSM like scale, those numbers. So they have like this exam that you can take. It's a little bit like our solo and ensemble. If we had like, you would do like this level and then you passed and then you went on to a certain, the next level. But they have scales and they have a certain list of approved solos. And so you can say that you're at fill in the blank level. And that gives you an idea of if you want to join a community ensemble, what level you're at, and then, what level the ensemble's at, so you can find a good fit.
I think some of those, in order to do the very top levels, you have to like also get above level 1 or 2 or 3 in piano or something like that.
I'm not sure, but yeah, I mean, it was, and so this ensemble was probably, I would say like a lower level college ensemble. We were playing some good stuff, that's for sure, and so that was my experience in the music education realm in England. I got a whole lot of education on all the tax stuff, which did not help me at all, because then I moved back to the United States. But it's cool, like having that specific minor of how to organize a musical event in your community outside of the school realm.
So I've started a couple of bands up myself, so I kind of know a little bit about this. But Pat, you've also started some bands up, that it didn't exist and then they existed. What were some of the things
they didn't? That's really deep, Tony. Yeah. They didn't exist. And then they existed.
Then Pat came along and they existed.
And they came into being.
What are some of the?
It helps when you have help.
That's the name of this episode now. Tony solves the chicken and the egg riddle.
It helps when you have help as part of it. So When we started the Ohio Brass Band in 2008, the whole reason for it was just to get a tour. We were going up to like Durham in the UK and playing at the big day, the Miners Gala. And so we just scraped together as many people as we could just to do this tour. And Paul conducted it. And it was the reason we did the tour is it was kind of a trial run for when the alumni band would go a couple years later. So trying out the trip with only 25 people rather than 100, we thought we'd give that a go. And after we went there, I knew Paul kind of always had a dream of playing Spike Jones music. He loved Spike Jones, back in the vaudeville days.
Yeah.
And so I said, well, we've got a core of a group, what if we do the US Open and we do an all Spike Jones show? And so we showed up to the US Open and must have come in, I don't know, 4th or 5th place out of 8 bands, but we won most entertaining, and I think we won best cornet as well. And so it was kind of just, what's this event to get somebody ready for? And then the next year we went back to the US Open because so many people had fun. The next year we joined the Dublin Community Bands, and it was just get ready for the US Open. And then it was, and we'll just get ready for OBAF as well. And then it was like, well, now they want us to play at the Irish Festival in Dublin. And so that band ended up slowly becoming year round. And I don't think they did NABBA for the first time until, if it started in 2008, maybe 2014 or so. And at the time too, we had the youth band, and we did the one course thing, and it was to get ready for a joint concert with DSB. And then it was to get ready for OBAF eventually. And so that's what we've done. And as you can see with Amy in charge, that's going to grow. And it's still based around getting ready for some of these events. And then Metro Brass, we're going to get ready for NABBA and do a group for NABBA. And then it's like, we're going to do NABBA and OBAF. And so that group will run from January to June. And so the chicken or the egg is, by having the festivals and these events, we're able to create bands, to go through and participate in those. So that kind of helps. So, and I think we've seen that with NABBA being in Fort Wayne for so many years, and now being in Huntsville, that groups that are in the area have something to shoot for and they want to go to. So I think, if you're in the middle of nowhere and there's nothing going on, it'd be harder with the model that I was using to get a group going. But if you're in an area that's kind of active and you can say, hey, let's shoot for these events and get a group together, I think that's a good way to get started.
Yeah, that's interesting, that of how bands can form and why they form, because the 2 bands that I started were basically because of the number of people participating was so great. We had too many people to fit in one band, so we had to make 2 bands. And then we had so many people audition that we started a 3rd band. So it's kind of kind of an interesting, way you can have different reasons for forming a band from nothing.
And I think we're hoping to get to that point with Dublin Metro Brass, where there's so many people, we'll end up having 2 groups, and maybe one will travel to NABBA and one will just do the local events or something like that, but just to get as many people involved. And I think it's really looking at what opportunities do you have around you, and, what are your resources to get things going.
This is an interesting question, but because I know what my answer is, but what is the absolute hardest thing when forming a brass band? What's the absolute toughest thing?
I think for me, it's more instruments than anything. I think literature you can always borrow from other groups, but trying to get, you can always start a brass band and have trumpets and euphoniums, but it's probably tenor horns is the main thing. Because a French horn, they're nice instruments and all, but they just don't sound the same and don't create that homogeneous sound from the top to the bottom of the band. River City, if you've ever seen them, they've got a great band, but the horn section just sounds a little different,
Yeah, all these years they've been in existence and they couldn't figure out how to buy tenor horns.
And I think it was a choice. And
percussion's also a really big problem too.
Yeah.
Especially like if you're planning to do the competition, you need stuff like tubular bells and timpani and stuff like that. And just I got 3 or 4 master's degrees in my percussion section. They don't own timpani. Like they don't have them just laying around.
That just means that they don't have enough work as freelancers.
Well,
if they would have,
or what are the master's degrees in?
Or their spouses are smart enough to talk them off that ledge.
It's funny with all of those legit reasons. The absolute toughest thing about starting a band for me has always been, what do we call it? Naming the band has been the absolute more time has been thought, especially between Jesse Rackley and myself, is what do we call it?
I remember when OCB, the Ohio Collegiate Brass, as I mentioned, they split, and it was going to be, is it Central Ohio Brass Band or should we go with Mid Ohio Brass Band? But for some reason, they didn't want to be called the Mob. So.
Yeah, well, I mean, we started our second, when I was doing the Triangle Youth Brass Band, it was like, okay, well, we have 80 people auditioning and I take 55 people in it. I was like, well, why we have enough people to have two bands? Let's just do two bands. So what do we call it? And it's like, well, we're part of the Triangle Brass Band, and it's the Triangle Youth Brass Band program. So it has to be Triangle Youth something. So we ended up starting it as the Triangle Youth Brass Ensemble because we didn't have cornets and French, we did trumpets and French horns to begin with. And then, so it stayed as that for a while, in the two things. And then when we added the third band, we had the instrumentation. We didn't have to, we had been stockpiling, cornets and tenor horns and baritones. So then it was like, all right, well, it has to be Triangle Youth something. And then Triangle Youth. So what we ended up with Triangle Youth Academy Brass Band. And then what we ended up doing is renaming the top band to the Watson Brass Band, so that because we were like, well, we can't fit anything else into Triangle Youth something, and I swear we spent hours just discussing, like, what do we do? How do we solve this problem? It's ridiculous. That's the hardest part of starting a brass band, is what do you call it?
You could have just gone Triangle Youth A, Triangle Youth B, Triangle Youth C.
Yeah, probably. Where the hell were you when we were having this discussion?
It's all where you want to spend your energy, if it's on the name, then.
I swear the rest of it was easy. Oh, we got to get horns. Okay, well, let's figure out how to get horns. The rest of it was easy compared to that. So
rehearsal space can also be a problem too, and that goes back to percussion, like Aaron said.
Yeah.
If you can find a rehearsal space that has percussion already, like a school or university, that's helpful.
It's almost necessary. Yeah. So we, Aaron is keeping track of things and mentioned that we got to figure out what our question of the day is. Our question of the episode is going to be. I don't know if Aaron, if you had something. I've got something that's kind of kicking through my mind that would be kind of an interesting thing to ask.
I always panic a little bit.
Fine. I do want to tell Pat how much I appreciate you also looking like you and I being brothers in jeans and polos at the thing at NABBA. I appreciate you so much. I had been in a suit that whole weekend, and I thought now was my time to chill out. And then we got called on stage. I had no idea we were going back on stage as like representatives or anything. And so when you came up to me, you were like, okay, you look like garbage too. Let's go sit down together.
Because I had been dressed up all weekend, and I was like, I'm finally off duty. I'm just going to wear polo and jeans.
Well, I envy you guys having enough time to go change into something not a suit. I didn't even have time to do that. I would have loved to. If I was uncomfortable all weekend being in a suit the whole weekend, it sucked.
So what was the question you got knocking around?
So the question is, since we're dealing with people who are doers and forward thinkers and like to start things, this is going to be kind of a dreamer type of question. Is it, if you could start anything, what would be the ultimate thing you could start? Let's keep it brass band related. But if there was a project that where you're like, man, if I didn't have any of these any obstacles in my way, what would be the thing that I would definitely start?
Who wants to start?
That's a tough one. I feel like I'm pretty good with what we've already got going, and just continuing it and maintaining it. Because once you get it going, to keep it sustainable is enough of a challenge.
So what are some of the pipe?
As it is.
You could also
I don't know. What were you going to say, Aaron?
Well, what are some of like the pipe dreams for what you've already done then? Like what's the real like hopeful shoot goals for what you've got going on?
I don't know if I have any left. I mean, I've gotten to go over with bands to the UK probably half a dozen times already. You know, we've been to so many different events here. We've got so many groups in town to see. And, you know, I noticed at OBAF this year that like every group that played, I had played at least one gig with at one point in time. And so it was like I knew all those bands and all those people. And it, you know, it's just, you know, felt just like a great experience to have had all those opportunities. I guess I just kind of feel lucky where I'm at right now. I suppose if anything, you know, it might be kind of nice to have, if there was like a NABBA bus or something where you had all the instruments underneath and you could go from town to town and do a 1-week workshop in the summer and bring brass banding to places that hadn't seen it before or had it before, or maybe didn't have access to instruments or things like that, just so that they could get a bug and maybe help them get started. And I know Yamaha used to do something like that in the summer many years ago, but that could be a fun summer to spend and then let somebody else do it the next summer, sort of thing.
That'd be a great thing to start, as long as you don't have to keep it going, right?
Right, exactly.
What about you, Aaron?
I'd really like to get a conservatory started and with the brass band idea going. I think that's our big go, and especially if we could get it like, and I know this is a huge pipe dream, but I'd love if it could become a federally funded thing so that a person's income level did not necessarily dictate whether or not they had access to being in the conservatory, but also I'm able to create jobs for musicians to work in the conservatory and give outlets to my music education friends to work that isn't necessarily public school oriented.
Yeah, you know what that makes me think of, Aaron, actually, now that you mentioned that, is like I always thought if I ever won the lottery, I'd want to build a theater that had like a hotel and a pub connected to it and band rooms, multiple band rooms. And like you could have like a dormitory. So like if somebody finishes at RNCM and they wanted to come over here for a couple years and they could work at the hotel and teach youth bands and all that stuff, you know, it's that's a serious pipe dream. You know, that would be hundreds of millions of dollars, I think, to get started. But, you know, it's kind of along that conservatory line. But I was thinking, how cool would it be if we could bring over some of the young talent that has had opportunities to play in the top bands there, like a group of, you know, 8 to 10, to just sit in with the brass band and help get it started and then teach private lessons to all the kids and get youth bands going and things like that.
Yeah. What about you, Amy?
I am a person who has like 10 projects in my head at all times. And then as time goes on, it kind of weeds out the ones, because I only have limited time. So as time goes on, I figure out which one I can actually devote my time to. But then there just is like this whole big pile of ideas that just kind of sits there. So I have, first off, I want to make I have like my realistic projects, and then I have your answer, like the pipe dream. This would be a really cool thing to do. So the realistic ones is I'd like to do a book similar to Labor and Love, where I outline the history of the brass band movement in North America through personal stories and quotes and reflections. And then through all of these quotes and reflections and everything, you get an overall kind of history from a personal perspective. I'd love to make a website for Amy's Brass Band and have like clickable like samples of each instrument, get people to, and I have a few people who committed to doing it, but I'm like, I just can't set up that intricate of a website right now. It takes time. But I'd love to do that, like an interactive website. And I'd love to get that put out in Spanish. I have it translated, but I need time. I don't have time. If anybody has time for sale, I would love to purchase some. I would like, this is probably going to actually get done. I'd like to make a rhythm warm-up book. Because one of my minors, this is like me talking about her minors at the RNCM. One of my minors was sight reading, was researching a whole bunch about sight reading and how we sight read and how we read rhythms. And I'd love to set up like a warm-up book. So like, you know how brass bands do like their hymn book or whatever. You'd have your hymn book and then you'd have your rhythm of the day, and it would go over a specific rhythm, so that every time you come up with every time you have that rhythm combination, you've practiced it, because the research says that if you look at rhythms in the patterns that they frequently appear, that you're going to be more efficient. So have like all of the rhythm patterns, so that each week you went over a different rhythm pattern, like 8th and 2/16 notes, and make like a little etude. You know, everyone would play on like F or whatever, you know, and they'd play through that. And so that over like a season, you'd go through all of these different rhythms with youth brass band. So that one will probably happen, because I see the usefulness with the youth brass band. But this is like the cool thing that I will never do, but it was just a fun idea. And I was like, hey, this would be really cool. Like, switch up Whit Friday and find a place that has a ton of like wineries and breweries, and like have the bands travel between all of those. And they could come up with like a pot of money, you know, and award prizes however they wanted, but bands would like travel between the wineries and the pubs and the breweries and play and try to win that money. And then the audience, that, you know, you'd bring in audiences to all those places to see all the bands travel through and everything. So that was my kind of fun idea that will never happen, but it was like, hey, that would be super cool.
I mean, that doesn't sound like it will be that horribly difficult to pull off, actually.
I think Arkansas was looking at trying to do that, and they were going to call it Wheat Friday.
I remember him telling about that.
That would be super cool, because Atlantic plays at a winery in New Jersey, and New Jersey has a ton of wineries. I don't know if you realize just how many wineries. Somebody told me that in the 1700s, when England wasn't importing any French wine, they had a competition to see where they were going to get their wine from, and it was New Jersey. So they have a concert at a winery, and it's built into the contract that we get wine at the end of the show. So I was like, this would be awesome.
Well, I think we do have about 14 like microbrewery tap rooms in Columbus, so you never know.
Yeah, and once again, if you have any time for sale, let me know. I'll purchase it.
That's great. Those are great ideas. All right. Well, it looks like we're coming to the end of our allotted time before Amy has to go on to her next thing.
Thanks so much for coming, Pat.
Yeah, no, thanks for the hang. It's been great chatting with all of you.